Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes, sir. Then again I'm falling. Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes, sir. Then again I'm falling. Let Jesus work it out. Peace of Father would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Peace of Father would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Peace of Father would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Oh.
All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos. We have an open panel today, and I'm joined by my friend, philosopher, and lover of Christ, Father Deacon Dr. Ananias. How you doing today, sir?
I'm blessed. Praise God.
Praise God. Glory to God for all things. Today, We're going to be hosting an open panel on the question, who or what is the greatest threat to the American people? And obviously, given some of the recent events going on around the world, I'm sure people that will be popping on will be pointing fingers at various things such as Zionism, the involvement in the Middle Eastern wars, the U.S. government itself. We've seen the NSA, the FBI, and the CIA mass surveillance of the U.S. population. I have some articles we'll be looking at, not reading anything, but just kind of going over a little bit of the potential possibilities. I'm sure some people are going to point to communism. If Andrew hops on, not Andrew Wilson, but Andrew um, met the mad social scientist, he's going to point to the Venezuelan Chavez communism groups. Communism may be one of them. But with the tenant media fiasco that just happened, there's a lot of talk right now about Russia 2.0 and Russia involvement in U.S. politics and creating division within the U.S. populace, all this different stuff. And of course, yesterday we had another mass shooting in Georgia by a trans shooter who was frustrated with his lack of acceptance of his non-binary status and his homosexual proclivities, and took an AR-15 that his father gave him at the age of 14 and killed 4 and I think injured 35 people. So all this stuff, SSRIs, big pharma, all these things might be potentials that people will be pointing at. So it'll be very interesting to see what people sort of isolate on what is or who is or what is the greatest threat to the American people. What are your initial thoughts here, Father Deacon?
By the way, we could have predicted that the shooter was a transformer. And I remember my wife saying, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, mark my word, it certainly is. And what's interesting, I saw a girl from like high school that was turned really super liberal, and she had reposted somebody's post that no children have ever died from drag queens reading them books and drag story out. Well, actually, that's not true.
Not true. Well, even the suicide rate, I mean, it's nearly 50% for those who have had any sort of surgeries to validate their identity. We'll put it that way. So, I mean, it's kind of a meme and a joke, but the greatest threat to trans people is often themselves.
Yes. And we know, I mean, the secularists and the liberals and the left would like us to think that these numbers have always been there. Now they have a platform and a safe space to come out and express. We know that's not true. We can look at the numbers. And so what we know, both medically speaking too, I've told you that one of the priests here, Father Andrew's wife, is a pediatrician, and she works in a lot of this area and neuroscience too, that we know that exposure to sexually explicit ideas and images actually creates this. And not only does it cause, mental and spiritual issues, other issues and learning issues, and possibly even tied to rises in autism. But the gender dysphoria and confusion we scientifically know that it's actually linked to that. So what do? We bring it in and expose the children in public schools as young as possible. And then is it any surprise that you have these numbers? And then so reading books to them does kill them. And it kills other people.
Right.
Look at how small the percentage of the population of transformers are, how many shooters there are. Now, for some reason, people can't actually get per capita and numbers, math correct on this stuff for some reason. I don't know. But as you brought up, the suicide rates. And there was an interesting study, too, as far as just the standard run-of-the-mill LGBT, not the transformers. But you know that they use emotional manipulation that if you don't accept, this is why people are killing themselves. Well, they did a study of the most accepting places like, San Francisco, the Castro district and stuff like that. And guess what? The numbers are exactly the same.
Right.
So no, it's what they're doing and what they're engaged in. And nobody wants to talk about the details, and I'm not going to talk about the details on here. But all you have to do is reach out to somebody like Joseph Chambra, who lived that lifestyle.
Right.
Get his book, and he'll actually tell. I mean, we cover that up. We don't talk about that stuff. But what's really going on in these cults and environments, and what are these people doing? It's horrendous. No wonder people are depressed and committing suicide. And
right. Yeah. Here's a little graph, and I just want to welcome Jose. Welcome to the panel, brother. God bless you. How you doing today?
I'm doing way better. It's
glory to God.
Health-wise, healing. This week was the first week I actually started lifting again. Anyway, so yeah, my autoimmune disease that's been crippling me for months. I can see the end is in sight, and it's getting ever closer.
Glory to God,
awesome.
man.
Did you go on to carnivore?
Yeah, even
yep.
stricter.
Even stricter than carnivore.
Yeah, it was. Wow. It's called the Lion Diet. So it's red meat, water, and salt. I did reintroduce oysters.
Have you tried organ? Did you also in the red meats have organ meats?
Yeah, so I've been eating from the beginning. I've been eating liver, kidney, heart. I've been doing the organ meats. So that's gotten it to go down.
Glory to God.
Yeah, so I'm very grateful for that. I'm just looking forward to. This actually relates to something, Father Deacon, that you said in your last catechesis class, where you talked about, if you're bleeding, you're not supposed to, approach the cup. And I've been bleeding continuously for more than 3.5 months now, and so I haven't approached the cup in that time.
Oh wow!
But it's coming to an end. So like the last open wounds on my leg from this autoimmune stuff are shrinking, and so once they're they're going to go.
Glory to God.
So I think in like 2 weeks, 2-3 weeks, they're going to be gone. I'll be able to wear pants, go to liturgy, and finally commune again. So
glory to God for that. Well, I know you're going to have some insight on today's topic, Jose. You always have wonderful comments. And I wanted to introduce it just because I'm sure some of the people that may be hopping on later, just to give a layout of different who's and what's certain people may be pointing to. And obviously, as Father Deacon was pointing out, we kind of got into the Georgia shooter. And here's the Colorado Springs shooter, the Denver shooter, the Aberdeen shooter, Nashville shooter, Uvalde shooter, and now the Georgia shooter all identify as non-binary, as trans. And really the topic today in regards to the greatest threat to the American people, obviously as Orthodox Christians, we're thinking it's the spiritual warfare. But I just wanted to have a conversation about what are some of the real existential threats, I'm sure some may come on and point to China. So I have this article here on Mike Collins's website talking about how China has purchased 384,000 acres of American agricultural land, and their ownership of U.S. ag has jumped up 30% just from 2019 to 2020. And also, China actually owns about 1/4 of the U.S. meat production. This is just talking about the pork industry, but I found something else that was discussing basically all domestic meat production in the U.S. 1/4 of it is being purchased by China. Are they the greatest threat to the American people? I know that they own some of the production companies in Hollywood. Here's one saying, again, the Tenet Media fiasco, Russia-funded media company that paid right-wing influencers. I've been seeing the rhetoric. Part of what kind of spawned me to create today's open panel was all the leftists and even the sort of centrist Republicans claiming that Russian influence is like one of the greatest existential threats to American politics and American sovereignty and all this different stuff. Obviously, my opinion is not going to be Russia for sure. The Communist U.S. Party, we got people like Hinkle, who identifies as an Orthodox Christian and then promotes communism on X and has one of the most engaged X accounts on the website. This one talking about the globalists, the globalization challenge, how the U.S. is shaping world trade and investment. Is it the globalists that are our greatest threat? Is globalism and the movement towards a one world government, is this the greatest threat to the American people? Here's Chuck Schumer just recently. I think he just gave another speech. This is from 2022, but I believe just this past week, he also called for the legalization of up to 11 million illegal immigrants in the United States. Obviously, this is to alter the political election that's coming up. I'm sure that is also one of the great threats that some people will point to: the Democrats, the liberals, the progressives, progressive ideology. Here's one on Christian Zionism in America. This is actually a reference to an academic article talking about God's country and Protestant evangelical Christians and their promotion of Zionism. Certainly, I believe Zionism is a great threat to the American people. I've talked with multiple Orthodox Christian fathers who are very concerned about a potential draft because that rhetoric is being issued. And we already know that there's boots on the ground. You have soldiers in Israel, also Ukraine, but they're trying to obfuscate some of the Ukrainian stuff. They're more open about the U.S. support for Israel. I mean, that is a major threat. Brothers in Christ that I've talked to, that's one of their biggest fears, is that their sons who are just graduating high school are going to be forced to participate in some of these global wars and the military industrial complex. This was just highlighting again the Georgia shooter. Is related to this photo here, that the Georgia shooter reportedly was angry over his trans acceptance, and this is one of the main reasons why he wanted to open fire and kill as many people as possible. Here's one: big tech, the swamp, mainstream media, coordinated censorship of American free speech. Is the lack of expression, personal expression, one of the greatest threats to the American people right now? I mean, I think one could kind of make an argument that way, because if we point to Zionism or criticism of any particular group, without free speech, you're not going to really be able to express or direct that criticism to spread amongst other people. Potentially, that's the greatest threat. Venezuelan gangs and the Aurora apartment complex has a stranglehold that apparently has existed from November of 2023 to the present, where they are essentially taking over entire apartment complexes, forcing people to pay them for rent. And for some reason, the police and federal authorities aren't putting an end to it. Is mass migration, and the people who are coming across the border undocumented, are they the greatest threats to the American people? And here's one on big pharma, traded its principles, profits, hypes fears, and exaggerates supposed benefits. Obviously, we can't say certain words because of YouTube TOS, but we know what happened in 2020, and then 2021 was the rollout of their medical procedure, and that certainly wasn't as effective as they said. But even with the trans shooter in the Georgia scenario, SSRIs, antidepressants, this type of thing, altering the psychology of many Americans, is big pharma one of the largest culprits and threats to the American people? And then here's one on the neocons and the ascendancy of the neocons. I can imagine some people may come on today and argue that these neocons, who are really sort of Trotskyite globalists, that they're actually the greatest threat because they're sort of hidden, camouflaged appearance within the Republican conservative movement. That I've heard many people say that the neocons are the greatest, because at least with the progressives or the Nancy Pelosi's or the Kamala Harris, we know what they think, we know where they are, but the people who are supposedly on our side, they're the worst ones. And then here's one. I don't subscribe, not giving Evie Magazine my email, but another one is feminism. And this article is about 45% of women are expected to be single and childless by 2030. Is the sexual promiscuity, feminism, the lack of, or the significant decline in birth rates, is this the greatest existential threat to the American people? I pose that question as well. And then the last one, this is actually an academic article arguing for the humanization of pedos and reducing the stigma associated with it. And they're talking about how this is a growing topic in academic and professional consideration. This was actually one of the things that opened my eyes and brought me to the Orthodox Church in Christ, was realizing that various professors and academics in Berkeley, California, were very much openly in favor of what they called MAPS, minor attracted persons. And with the Epstein list, the Epstein profile, and potential blackmail on the leaders of this country and corporations, is that the greatest threat to the American people? So I just wanted to lay all that out just to provide
One more.
potential options. Yeah, go ahead.
The opiate fentanyl crisis,
Oh, that's another good one.
which is
Yeah.
connected to a lot of this stuff.
Right. Absolutely. So
And then
welcome.
people living in Korea.
Yeah. Yeah. Expats in
Sorry.
Korea.
I'm the worst. I'm causing so many problems for America being here.
Oh, I just want to welcome all the so the Crucible just rated. Welcome all the Crucible crew. God bless you guys. And if anybody who's coming, I don't know if Jim Bob's still streaming or not. Anybody from Jortlandia, welcome as well. So let's kind of get the discussion going. Either any of the three of you guys want to kind of kick it off. What would you, or how would you address the topic of the greatest threat to the American people?
Can I just add something?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
So you're going to trip out on what the gospel reading was for today. It's Matthew 24, 27 through 33 and 42 through 51. It's all about the tribulations and the birth pains and the warning signs of the end. That just happens to be the gospel for today.
Wow. Timely and perfect, right on topic. Well, Father Deacon, I mean, everything we pointed to is really part of an overall spiritual attack, and it relates to your point in regards to the gospel reading, that we are moving towards, when the end times is. We're Orthodox. We don't put a timeline on it, but certainly we're closer today than we were yesterday. How do you approach and looking at the greatest existential threats to the American populace? And I wanted to make that distinction because we're not talking about the American empire. We're not talking about America as the military industrial complex or the people in power. I'm talking about the people who live inside the United States. What's kind of your thoughts?
That's hard. I think you could categorize.
It could be more than one, right?
You could categorize some as like the top. I don't know. That's really hard. I mean, obviously, as far as American people, I worry more about, obviously, moral issues, and the moral deflation of society than actual physical threats and election interferences and stuff like that, or China coming. I'm not saying that stuff's
not important, right?
Important, but people can survive wars. They do. People do not survive this kind of moral deflation and degradation of, and so I'd probably put the moral stuff going on, the PEDO stuff, the pushing of the trans, the any of the stuff that really is like pro-death, and the feminist movement is pro-death. This is where you get antinatalism and all this kind of stuff, and that for me, probably I would categorize those as the top.
Right.
And the other thing too, it's actually what's causing the political divide. So I was talking with a parishioner, and he was having debates over Trump with a left liberal. And just like in apologetics and philosophy itself, what's the problem? You get bogged down in the details. And you have this, well, if I just show them the evidence and the argument, then they'll see it. And we're in a place politically that's so divisive that that's always kind of been the case but it's just so extreme now that there's nothing you could show the other side. They're
Right.
just not going to.
Well, to your point, one thing that I didn't mention, and I'm curious, I'm really curious what Jose's response is going to be, but the destruction of like identity, people don't know who they are, the
Yes.
creation of
Yeah.
nihilism, the loss of
Yep.
meaning. I mean, that kind of feeds into the fentanyl crisis, the opioid crisis, the
absolutely.
destruction of the nuclear family, and that gets to the heart of the moral issue. And what is it to be an American? It doesn't really mean much anymore, right? It seems like that's been totally annihilated, and there's not much to be proud of. And because of that, and deep down, whether people want to be vocal about it or express it consciously or not, there's a lot of sins that this American empire has committed, especially after 1963 and the assassination of JFK. The intelligence agency, and me, generally speaking, I always say that the greatest threat, maybe not in regards to a specific topic, but overall, I believe it's the U.S. government itself. And that's what I believe the American people, to some degree, the greatest threat is the U.S. government, these intelligence agencies, which is tied with many of the ideologies and their alliances with foreign countries. But Jose, what is your thoughts on this topic?
In terms of destruction of identity, they started with destroying local identities. So the first you see, I mean, going back to the American Civil War, you have the transition in the American Civil War where you go from the United States are to the United States is. One thing that stood out to me in the Civil War narrative I was reading of Shelby Foote was General Thomas, when he was, because when the typically when after a battle, troops would be buried based on the state that they came from. So we buried together. After the battle that General Thomas fought against Hood, where he effectively destroyed the army of the Confederate Army of Tennessee, General Thomas said actually gave an order to not do that and just to mix them all up. So they're just going to be identified as together as American. So you see this intentional attempt to reduce local identities. You see this too. I mean, I'm more familiar with what happened within Texas. So, of course, in the case of like the Tejanos, for example, I mean, that's a little bit more well known with how, like in the school systems, et cetera, there's a huge push to de-Hispanicize them. So prevent them from speaking Spanish. I know people, older people, who, when they were children, like they're 5, 6 years old, they would receive corporal punishment if they spoke something in Spanish in school. But it was not just done to the Tejano population. It was also done to the German Texans. So like go down 100 miles down the street from where I am, you had a very, very huge German Texan population that arrived through Galveston 170 years ago, a little more than that. The federal government actually put government agents in their churches, in the Texan German Catholic churches as well as their Lutheran churches, to ensure that the priests and the ministers were not giving homilies in German, and to make sure that the Sunday school was not being taught in German, because they wanted people to be speaking English only. So you have this the intentional. It's a side effect of the flavor of nationalism that existed in the United States, where you have this intentional devaluing of local folk culture. This is why, like, for example, Appalachia gets derided or not abused, what's the word, mocked so much by the coasts, because they still hold on to a semblance of their folk culture. And that's something that the American empire is very much against. It's very much for having a flat, general, popular national culture, which is fundamentally, in the U.S. case, fundamentally liberal and cosmopolitan.
Well, and it relates to even things like the transhumanist movement, which are very open about their promotion of what they call morphological freedom, and the idea that historical identity, ancestral identity, these things are going away, especially in the postmodern, post-secular turn of the contemporary period. So therefore, we need to, and what they evangelize is that they offer you to create your identity. This is partly why the LGBTQ is so intertwined with transhumanism. And if you want to blend yourself into a cyborg or whatever it is, this is about you actually becoming more, and actually responding to the nihilism of modernity, is that now you have the agency to create your own identity.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Jose, I have a question just on that line of thinking. So I'm Gen X, 80s, 90 kid. And one thing that was remarkable about the 80s and 90s, there were groups and cliques in high school. You had the greasers, the rockers, rappers. You had like the jocks, the OCAD, academics. You had these kind of different groups. They had their own aesthetics, music style, and stuff like that. And I actually appreciated it. And one thing now, and that would even fall into like cinema as well. So music, cinema. So something that I find really interesting is we're both diverse and united, because at the same time, we didn't have streaming services. There wasn't Apple Music and stuff like that. So it was the same TV show. We'd all sit down and watch Fall Guy or something. Like, it was all on the same thing. So while being distinct, it was kind of orthodox, right? One in many. Without dissolving the many, we're united. And what's fascinating being a professor and an educator is the homogenization. There are no cliques.
Right.
The music, like if you look at music genre, it's pretty much all rap. Even if you're a white kid, it's, degenerate type of rap. I'm not like underground hip hop, cool stuff. It's
not KRS-One anymore. It's like mumble rap and promoting, like selling yourself sexually.
Even the non-rap is totally, even the non-rap is totally nihilistic if you listen to the lyrics.
Yeah, both Ann said exactly what I was going to say, is that even country music is beginning to adopt more of a hip hop presentation.
Country's awful now.
And that homogenization you mentioned, you also see that with accents. That's the thing. A lot, like, accents are huge, and them fading away. Like even the accent that I have, like, this is something, my parents more or less intentionally raised me with. Like, my mother, she was trained in what's it called? Not Her Majesty's English, but received pronunciation, for example. I have one cousin who he perfected his English watching Duck Dynasty. So he speaks exactly like Phil. And I think of all my generation, he's the one whose English is the most interesting, because he looks like a stereotypical mestizo, but he opens his mouth and he speaks English like Phil. So
I didn't even think about the accent. You're right. I mean, obviously this,
dialect. Well, I recently saw an article about the dying out of dialectics in America, and they were talking about just from the 1960s, at least the thing that I read. They're looking at the 50s and the 60s compared to the 21st century, and how unique dialects from different parts of the country are basically going away.
Well, I can speak on that a little bit. I've retained my very thick upper Minnesotan accent, despite being abroad so long, mostly because I've been removed from the American culture for the last 10 years. And people hear it and they'll ask me, are you Irish? Like, Americans have no concept of different accents anymore. And these are fellow Americans. They'll be like, where are you from? It's like, are you from abroad? Are you from like Europe or something like that? I'm like, no, I'm Minnesotan. This is an upper Midwest accent. This is super common, right?
Right.
But it just doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. Welcome, the Mano. Welcome to the panel today. Feel free. Do you want to address the general? We're kind of just going and discussing various threats to the American people, but do you have anything in particular on the who or the what is the greatest threat to the American people?
I kind of did, but you guys were just talking about, Father Deacon and I brought up the 90s and being Gen X and all the the different groups, whether you're a goth or you're a punk or this and that. And that's actually something we talk a lot about on my channel. And I think it's an important thing to consider, because that generation, Gen X, was like the cross section between like modern technology. But we also remember what it was like to fall on your face and your friend would laugh at you but pick you back up, because we kind of remember all those important moments, right? But going back to the cliques, one important thing was it wasn't just about the costume, right? So if you're a punk, you could look many different ways and consider yourself punk. It was more about like an attitude and a kind of way that you carried yourself, of a form of identity with the community aspect of it. And I think with this modern technology now and everything kind of blends together, and to your point about accents, it kind of blurs those lines. And so to go to the original question of this whole stream, I would sum it up just personally would be a subjectivism, like incorporating that and infusing that into society. As soon as you start incorporating subjectivism into society, all of a sudden lines get blurred, right? Whether you're talking about transgenderism or whether you're talking about anything, just that ideology alone is like the starting point. Sorry for the ramble, but I kind of came to that like a couple of days ago. I was rereading the Kabbalion Hermetic text, and I remember I was rereading it for like something I'm planning on putting out, not because I'm reading it to promote it. But their ideas and concepts of blurring those lines is very prevalent in the Hermetic philosophy. So it seems like that seeding kind of leads to a destruction within the American society because it was mostly based on individualism. So sorry for that little bit of a rant, but I was trying to, because everything you guys were saying was interesting, and I was like, I want to jump in here, I want to jump in there. Sorry about that rant.
Sure.
And it's an idealism and Gnosticism too.
Yeah.
Right. Well, Howard Bloom, one of the things I was actually referencing him, I was writing this morning, and Howard Bloom wrote a book on the American religion in which he argues that it's explicitly Gnostic and that whether from the frontier naturalist perspective or the 21st century, that American religion is tied with this idea of like personal liberation, and it's about knowing something. It's about knowing your rights. It's about knowing the Constitution. It's about knowing, your particular faith tradition or whatever it is that sets you or liberates you. And then this is part of the American ethos, and it has undertones of Gnosticism. I think there's something really there. Not here to promote Howard Bloom, but I think that argument is interesting.
I would say my assessment is that everything you guys have said is right, but I also think that there's a deeper issue where America, and this is from my assessment of reading some of the histories recently, is that the last chance America had to form a cohesive identity on of itself that the people could attach to was like around the time of Theodore Roosevelt. I think the entire concept of the Rough Riders, this kind of manifest destiny, this like Americans, we are united in this kind of look toward the future kind of a thing, where we're united in that sense, that basically died after World War I, when we decided to remove ourselves from this kind of bubble that we had created of our own sphere of influence. And so I think that when we burst that bubble, all of those ideologies from outside invaded in, and it created this chaotic nightmare that we're seeing right now. And then people, because there's nothing to attach to, there's nothing firm they can grip onto, what do they go into? Because they just have Enlightenment philosophy, they just attach themselves to nihilism. I think Father Seraphim Rose hit the nail on the head with his book on that, where he basically predicted this is going to be the end result of the fact that we have nothing grounding us.
Yeah.
So
Sean says, how about the Federal Reserve and fiat money system? I think certainly that is a threat. I don't know if it's the greatest threat, but I'm curious what your guys' thoughts on foreign countries. What would you argue as the greatest foreign threat to the American people? My immediate inclination is Zionism and potentially the state of Israel. But I'm curious what the panel thinks.
I just wanted to follow up quickly because I know people will say China from the agricultural purchases you mentioned. So China is still. I haven't found numbers more recent than 2021 for what's his name, Bill Gates. But it's possible that China still doesn't own as much as Bill Gates does. So the total amount of land that China owns, farmland wise, is like less than 1% of the agricultural land. But what's important about what they've bought is where they've bought. They've only bought agricultural land that's around military installations in the United States, which I find to be absolutely hilarious. So this is why I don't take the American Empire as a serious empire. It's such a joke at this point. It's like the Western Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire at least still had a cohesive sense of, okay, this is who we are, this is what we do, and then we're not going to let someone subvert it from the outside. The Western Roman Empire, everything was just being sold to the highest bidder. And I personally, I think I see that as related to why Arianism persisted for so long in the West compared to the East, as to why the Western Empire collapsed, whereas the Eastern Empire continued. In terms of like Foreign threats. I'd say the biggest foreign threat. It's no individual nation per se. I mean, okay, Israel's a pretty strong contender because Israel's trying to drag us into World War III. Ukraine is also trying to drag us into World War III. But for the American people themselves, the biggest fundamental threat is mass migration.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, it's already beyond. So, like the Germanic migrants into the Western Roman Empire were less than 1% of the population, and in the United States, the United States is more than 60 million. I mean, foreign-born people in the nation out of 400 million people. That fundamentally changes things. So I know Georgetown's heading to be majority subcontinental Indian, for example. But you have huge swaths of America that are not going to look. It's just not going to be America anymore.
Right. And even with Trump's proposed, plan to send so many of these migrants back. I mean, there's no way, even if it only existed within the 4 years, there's no way he's going to get millions and millions of people deported. I mean, it's just going to be such a difficult task. And that's, I do agree with, mass migration being one of the greatest threats to the people who live in this country. I mean, obviously the Aurora, Colorado thing, but it ties into the nihilism. It ties into the loss of identity, and it ties into any sort of shared American community. I just here in Indianapolis, I recently went down there and just see how there doesn't feel a community spirit. You go to any major American city, there isn't a shared American ethos whatsoever. It's just many groups of different people from around the world, and they kind of stay with each other. And
by the way, somebody asked through 499 and asked about Joseph Chambra's book right here. It's called Disorder.
Yes. Yeah, that was Foregone was asking, what was the book Father Deacon was talking about? Was it written by Joseph Chambrock? And can you
Chambra,
yeah.
There. Also, I know what the greatest threat. It's Antarctica. Yeah,
so true.
Because that's where the Hollow Earth lizard people live, and
right.
I mean, what sounds like a greater threat than Hollow Earth lizard people?
Well, we all know one is already ruling over us. Right? It wasn't the Clintons or something like that, but no. One thing I would say, I have a slightly different view on the foreign threat. I think the biggest foreign threat is whichever one we make it of ourselves. And this is what I mean by that, is that the moment we step on the toes of any nation that is got the right allies in its pocket is the moment that it's going to collapse our financial our financial ability to compete on the world stage.
So like Iran, for example.
So Iran, North Korea, Russia, any one of them that are in part of BRICS. Now, BRICS just announced that they're rolling out BRICS Pay, and 160 countries already have agreed to sign up for it.
Right.
That is the biggest threat, in my opinion, that we currently have, because if our financial ability to kind of elbow around the world stage goes away, that's all we have. That's all we have left. We can't, and I'll say this as someone who's familiar with these things. I won't dox myself, but I'm familiar with these things. We couldn't win a war against North Korea.
I believe
and that's shocking. That's shocking to a lot of people, though. A lot of Americans still have this raw American spirit. We don't have the logistical capacity, the naval capacity, or any of these other things to successfully win a land invasion against North Korea, mostly because North Korea has actual allies that are willing to die for it. What is an ally that's willing to die for the United States?
Right. Well, military enrollment's down like 45%. We see the trans agenda now in the military. I have friends that just got out of the military, and they basically iterated the same thing, that you'd be surprised how incompetent. Like we can't even, there's no way we could go do a major land battle against anybody. And when you pointed to BRICS, that's a really great point, because even for the average American person, the rise of BRICS and the undermining of the U.S. dollar, that's going to affect the immediate life of somebody living in this country.
Just to reinforce the whole emphasis of we can't, the United States cannot even beat North Korea. Just looking at artillery barrel and artillery shell production, North Korea has 10 times the industrial production, like military industrial production of the United States. In terms of like actual real weaponry that gets made and delivered. In terms of dollars, it's valued very low, which is why, in terms of GDP, America's MIC looks really huge compared to North Korea's. But in terms of like actual weapons in the hands of a soldier, North Korea's already got an order of magnitude over the United States.
And when Russia, didn't Putin and Russia, Putin just formed an agreement with Kim Jong-un in regards to North Korea basically building many of the weapons that Russia is going to purchase from them.
Yep. So it's fascinating because the Kim family's not they're not retarded the way that they get portrayed in the West. Believe it or not, they actually were probably the most in terms of the people who foresaw modern warfare, what modern warfare in a peer-to-peer conflict was going to look like. The people who had the best picture of it was actually the Kim family. Because a lot of people were like, United States was heavily invested into cyber warfare and satellites, drones, etc. Russia was too, also focusing on that. Whereas the Kim dynasty was like, no, the future is artillery, and they actually invested heavily, also even in silent artillery shells, which is crazy to me. They actually pulled that off, and they're actually testing them in Ukraine.
If I can reiterate just two things on that. One, not only did they produce more, America has enough, and this is publicly available stuff, so it's not like I'm saying anything that's untoward, but we have enough supplies on the Korean Peninsula for our own army to last maybe 5 days.
Yep.
Of like constant warfare. North Korea can do it for months nonstop, and there's nothing we can do about it. Furthermore, because we invested so much into cyber, all it takes is one good artillery shell, and boop, all the cyber on the peninsula goes gone. Right? It just takes one. Because the way most of this stuff is designed is that you have to have a central trunk. And so all of the data goes to that central trunk. You hit that one building where that trunk is, all your communications are down. So and then they did a test for this. And a bunch of generals got fired at the time, but they never fixed anything. They said, get planes in the air without your computers or your laptops or your iPads. They couldn't get a single one in the air. So we are hamstringing ourselves by not actually learning lessons from Ukraine, which the Russians are, and I guarantee you the Chinese are also sending advisors there to learn lessons as well. So yeah, that's what should scare people, is that we aren't learning lessons because we have incompetent leadership. So
to go back, do you see, looking at warfare in like modern warfare may not be exactly the way we think it is in terms of like, I agree with a lot of what you guys are saying there for sure. But going back to the financial situation, if we look at it from that perspective, as well as the migrant situation, if you look at who's controlling and navigating those two things, I think it's important to kind of look at that. So I'm not trying to change the subject. I'm just trying to say that if we look at the migrant problem, for example, it's not just in the U.S. Obviously, we know that, right? We saw the first attempt at it, like on a global scale, in 2016 with Syria and all that stuff in Europe, and we saw what that did. And then we see the outcome in the UK. I'm from Canada, originally living in Mexico, and in Canada they're having the exact same problems you guys are having. In terms of the migrant situation. Why is that happening globally? It almost seems like you're being set up for something bigger, right? Mm-hmm. So even if we do look at this from like zoom out a bit, and we look at the financial situation, we look at this migrant situation, and we look at a lot of the other pieces that are kind of on the table, it looks like there's a pattern. There's a certain group, let's say, that's kind of behind most of this stuff, and I think that it's important to identify that. It's also the first time in history that I can recall that people can have, I know that there's a lot of censorship online, but it's the first time we can talk about the bagel people and all that situation like we do. Like, I know we look at it as we're really censored, but I remember having these conversations in private, like early 2000s, and you couldn't really say it openly. But now we can talk about Zionism, we can talk about all these things. So the point I'm trying to make is, it looks like there's so many things on the table. Any one of those things pops off can create an entire problem that's worldwide, especially for the first world.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the migration stuff, the thing is, it's older than the bagel people. The use of migrants in order to maintain the Anglo-American Empire goes back to the 19th century. So even take into account the American Civil War. So 200,000 of the Union troops that were in arms were German 48ers, which were the romantic nationalists and communist revolutionaries of the revolutions of 1848. So the Union Army just plowed in tons of migrants, especially Germans, and then followed by Irish, in order to maintain the American empire. So you have this. This is why you had like the first. So what Nicholas mentioned earlier about Theodore Roosevelt was the last time where you had an attempt at where you had a real possibility of having a forged American identity. That's because that's when they shut down migration to the United States, and they actually allowed the mass migration that had come in during and post Civil War to essentially blend in with the rest of the heritage Americans. So you end up formation with what I refer to as American, and others too refer to as American 2.0. And that America 2.0 then got swamped by 1965. The de facto open borders migration that kicked in 1965, legal and illegal, with in numbers that outweigh the amount that was done under the previous mass migration. And the thing is, part of the root for why they kept doing mass migration even after the Civil War. So J.P. Morgan actually in his journals or whatever you call it, writings referred to it because J.P. Morgan saw the biggest threat to the American experiment, the American project, as Tsarist Russia, which is why the Morgans or Morgan and his successors funneled money to the Bolsheviks, because the goal is to essentially overthrow the overthrow the Tsar, destabilize Russia, and try to depopulate it. Because he mentioned how, like, at the rate that Russia was growing solely from natural increase, because the average Russian woman, as like even with industrialization that was happening under Tsar Nicholas II, birth rates were not dropping the way that they dropped in England and in the United States. The Russian woman was still having like 10 to 12 kids. And J.P. Morgan saw that as the biggest threat, and that America was barely keeping up with Russia, and that was with mass migration. So it's a tactic that the specific Anglo-American elite have used, and they used this before. The Rothschilds took over the Bank of England, and they've done it, and it's been done after. The thing is, they've pressed that button, for lack of a better term, one too many times, and they've done it to such a scale. As you mentioned, from Mexico. So like at this point, and Samuel Huntington pointed this out, where what makes Mexican migration different in the current mass migration is the fact that Mexico is right next door, and you have a huge swath of American territory that was formerly part of New Spain, and there are whole towns, rivers, cities, counties that have the Spanish names still there. I mean, 2 blocks down, there's a county with my last name on it, and that's not an accident. And there's a river there with my last name on it, and that's also not an accident. I know Mexican friends who they went up to work at Utah, and then they find these towns with Nahua names, and that's because that's where the Nahua came from. They came from Utah, and the natives of the Central American, of the Mexican highlands, they came from what is now Mormon land. So they start recognizing, like, wait a minute, this land was ours. It's like, yeah, it was before the Mormons. You guys were here. So that's what makes it so much more dangerous, because then you have people who have, for lack of a better term, to use a video game term, they have a claim per se that they could choose to fight over for a given piece of territory, and that's extremely dangerous to the American empire. It's not like they're German migrants that are taken from over there, or Russian migrants taken from over across the sea. There's no land bridge to Russia. There's no land bridge to Germany. So that's what makes this such a much bigger threat for the American empire in the long run. It's because it's like, right next door, and there's a huge swath of territory that people could reasonably start seeing as their own, and not as part of the American empire.
Well, when you say American empire, my mind immediately thinks that the American empire wants the mass migration. The American people don't. And when you look at who's coming across the border, again, we point to Aurora. I mean, these aren't doctors and lawyers and people that are going to contribute to society. I mean, it's known that Venezuela emptied parts of their prisons and basically directed them to go to the southern border of the United States, and the empire lets them in willingly. And now California wants to give them home loans so that they can afford housing and all this stuff, while the average American is struggling just to get by.
Yeah, so there are two things there. So one, I know in the case of the Venezuelans, so down in San Antonio, the U.S. military is actively recruiting the Venezuelans. So that's already happening. They're already setting up.
I know about that. Yep.
Yeah. So I've seen that with my own eyes, and so that's happening. and they're already laying out citizenship for military service. This is exactly like the Western Roman Empire.
Right.
So that's in that case. Now, when you're talking about the home loans and stuff, so that's because of how the American financial monetary system works. So the biggest contributor for asset prices in general, home prices in particular, is the rate of change of the volume of mortgages. So over time. So essentially, the acceleration of mortgage debt. Like if mortgage debt is growing faster than it was before, that results in more housing prices. If mortgage debt grows slower than it was, it doesn't have to shrink. It just has to grow slower than what it was growing before. Housing prices go down. So if there's a slowdown in the debt creation, that will cause an asset crash across the entire United States. That will cause a financial crisis. So the problem is that the American financial system is having is that the average American can no longer take on more debt. Practically all discretionary spending is being used to service existing debts. Student loans in particular are pretty horrendous. So if someone's paying student loans, a lot of people now who are paying student loans, they can't even afford to get a mortgage.
Right.
So the problem is that if people don't take out more debt, the system is going to collapse. So the solution they come up with is you just need more debtors. You don't even care about the quality of the debtors. They just need more people in debt. And if you actually look at even just looking at illegal immigrants crossing the borders over the last 10 years, on average, they end up $50,000 in debt in the first 10 years. And that is all the banking system cares about. And that's why you won't see Wall Street. You have not seen Wall Street, rather, either wanting to crack down on either the illegal migration that's been crossing because these people will use new debt via payday loans, etc. Nor have you seen any crackdown on like H-1Bs and such like that, the legal migration pathways either, because these people will take on mortgages, credit cards, car loans, etc. So it's just the reality of if you're going to have a debt-based system, the debt you cannot have a slowdown in the rate of growth of debt in the system without the system collapsing. So the entire financial sector has a huge incentive for more and more people to come in here just to get in debt.
Right. Jack, welcome, brother. Do you have you want to discuss the panel topic today of who or what is the greatest threat to the American people?
Yes, please. This is my favorite topic, and this is just beautiful. What is the greatest threat to the American people? Who is? Those who enable lies. I mean, seriously, this world is, well, I think this is the right place. The good news and bad news, it's biblical, right? It's time. Humanity has been deceived by the manipulation of the economic structure, the government structure. Mankind has used complication, right, to keep everyone confused and at war and divided with each other. Behind all of these wars that are happening, it's secrets and lies.
True. And regarding Jose's point too with mass migration, I mean, you look at these NGOs and who is running many of these NGOs, and obviously we're on YouTube, so we can't violate TOS, but there's a predominant majority of certain people with certain dispositions and religion and affiliations to Israel that seem to be, again, bringing about this collapse. And from their theology, too, they have to, this intermingling of the Europeans with mass migration, this is part of, at least those who believe in bringing about the Jewish Messiah, this is something that is part of prophecy. Obviously, we have to be very careful talking about that here on YouTube. So I know everybody on the panel is aware. Some people have come on and not been so conscious of the limitations. So I appreciate that. But what are your guys' thoughts on?
I have one thought. I hearing what you're saying, but I do have one thought. It's a theory, and I want to hear what you guys think because I haven't had anyone critique it yet. I theorize that most people, and this is going back slightly to the topic that Jose and Father Deacon and you guys were talking about, is it's my theory that most of these people that don't have a meaningful connection to the American land, like the actual place here, the community where they grew up, I think if the financial system were to collapse, let's just say it does,
Uh-huh.
I think a lot of those people will leave of their own accord. I think a
Well, yeah.
huge swath of them will. And I use this example in Minnesota. We have a lot of Somalian immigrants in the Twin Cities area, and they're entirely dependent on food shelves, on government handouts, and the free of government electricity in the cities. One bad winter and those services go under as well, they're gone or they're dead. So my theory is that actually a collapse might be good for the health of the nation in terms of financials alone.
Well, and from a spiritual perspective, when God brings suffering, this is a purification process. And as Orthodox, and Father Deacon would be able to speak to this better than anybody else, suffering is that which grows us spiritually. And when listening to like Metropolitan Neophytos of Morphu, he's talked about this crisis point that's coming for America, at least according to St. Paisios and Elder Ephraim and all this, that on the other side, it's going to be a lot better due to this purging spiritually of people and finding Christ. Wesley, go ahead.
Have you heard the term the city of Babylon?
Yes.
And that the angels will, in rejoicing, say the city of Babylon is fallen. In Scripture. How they will. Do you know what the city of Babylon is?
America?
No. And this goes with what Mr. Nikolai over there was saying about the economic crash. You're going to be tempted with some free money. $32,523. It is the emerald in the Old Testament. The Lord shall smite thee with the blotch of Egypt, the emerald, and the itch and the scab. The emerald is the city of Babylon. It's the money that those will get free if they take the mark of the beast, a branded barcode called the Omni. And that city of Babylon, Jesus shall fall it.
Yeah, I don't typically, I think, at least from my my experience, the church fathers typically, and just the church in general, is very cautious about making prophetic predictions of that nature. And I think actually one thing that Father Peter Heers recently talked about, I think it was on the Alex Jones show, actually, funny enough, he talked about how prophecy was meant for the repentance of a nation.
Right.
And that prophecies aren't necessarily meant to come true. And one of the examples he gave was the prophet Jonah going to the city of Nineveh. He says, this is what will happen if you do not repent as a nation or as a people, right? And I think that's the operative thing that we should always remember, is that we should be calling for repentance of our nation. Our nation America has a lot of things to repent of, frankly.
Absolutely.
The West broadly, but just we're focusing on America. So
yeah.
The
global war and abortion
that's my perspective on
two
that.
key points.
Do you know why you could not move as you lay in your bed on October 10 in the year 2005? You heard a voice that you believe is the Spirit of God. It told you, I will turn and toss you violently like a ball, and you could not move. And on March 31st, 2020, you heard the Spirit voice that you believe is God say, don't tell the vision. And you could not move. You had lost your freedom in those moments. Do you know why you could not move? And do you know who spoke those words to you?
Well, I don't remember that happening to me.
I don't remember that.
I don't remember.
Yeah. Well, Jesus said to you, no time to talk, Allah, and you want war. You deny he is God, all of you. Satan told you those words. And the reason you could not move is because Jesus quit holding you up.
Yeah, I'm not getting it.
I'm confused on your argument here. What?
Yeah.
What? Is this an attack on orthodoxy, or
This is bringing
I don't
back
understand
memories.
What the argument is?
Yeah, I don't.
I remember maybe 2 times in my life I've had like what some people call a night terror, or where you kind of half wake up and you're paralyzed right now.
Sleep paralysis.
Sleep paralysis.
Well, yeah, and specifically when it's like you're awake but you're not, and then you're sort of in your room and you feel like there's a presence coming into the room and you're kind of terrified of it. This is something that I don't know. I've literally like happened like twice in my life, so. I remember that has happened. That has happened maybe twice. But the date, I don't know. I didn't mark it on the calendar. They didn't say anything either. I was like, man, I just got to wake up right now because this is terrifying.
Wesley, do you mind? What is your religious disposition or spiritual perspective here? I assume you're Christian. Are you Protestant, evangelical?
Jesus is God. There is no other God beside him. I cannot save you. I cannot turn you to him. Only he can do that. He is God, and there has never been any other God, and there never shall be any other God. He wrote the Old Testament. He wrote the New Testament. The way he appeared to every one of you 7 times is the way he appeared to those he chose to write his words, which we call the Bible. The voice that told you, I will turn and toss you violently like a ball, fooled a lot of people through history. He fooled Muhammad into writing the Quran. He fooled Krishna into writing the book of texts of Krishna. He fooled Smith into writing the Book of Mormon. He fooled men who say they're Christian into changing the King James Version into the New King James Version and the New International Version.
So
that voice that told you, I will turn and toss you violently like a ball, was Satan. The fire he can pull down from heaven. That's what he did.
Some people in
I am a Jew.
We're asking, do you know the
I am a Jew.
You're a Jew. Okay.
So KJ the only messianic Jew.
So
I am not a messianic Jew. I am the second in Leviticus, the sacrifice of the second in the manner.
Right.
You know of the little book in Revelation? I am that book. The angels who you deny exist will tell you these words. Jesus, would you make all of those be given the taste of honey in their mouths in this same minute, please?
All right, he's trolling us. All right, come on.
Yeah, this has
Kyrie
to
eleison, Kyrie eleison.
All right, Wesley, we appreciate you, man, but it's a little off topic. We're discussing some of the threats to the American people. So,
gnash your teeth, Allah, twice.
I got a question on the original topic. Did you all already go through, because the prompt is who is the greatest threat to the American people? Did you already talk about, because I know you've been going for over a half an hour now, is oops. So yeah, did you already define who are we talking about? Like, who is the American people? Who are these? Like, are we just saying all the people who are currently resident?
Well, it's who
citizens?
or what? Who or what? So we've talked about the opioid epidemic. We've talked about mass migration. We've talked about Israel, Zionism, China, Russia, the tenant media fiasco, in regard to a lot of the left saying Russia is the biggest threat to the American people and democracy. We talked about
Jesus showed you how America's going to fall. He showed it to you. China is going to nuke.
All right,
China's gonna.
I can handle so much, but once it derails the combo, I mean,
I couldn't, dude. I couldn't. I was laughing so hard. I had to mute
I couldn't
myself.
tell if it was a troll or if he was serious or.
The eyes give it away.
Again.
Oh,
The
man.
eyes always give it away.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah, go ahead, Jack.
I've crossed paths with Mr. Wesley before. He's been touched. He's living in.
Where was he touched?
No.
He's had experiences that I think he's confused about, And
Okay.
so he has a lot of prophetic claims, and but to come back to the topic of the threat to the American public and some of the other things, someone brought up repentance. And seriously, our world, if we come to the truth, I'm wearing a Veterans for Peace sweatshirt. I served in the military as a kid. So I volunteered without realizing what I was doing to become a part of the military industrial complex. And later on in my life, and as a matter of fact, about 2018, that's when I started thinking about God. And so I've devoted myself to following the way and to learning and growing in my relationship and my understanding of God. And to kind of repent for myself, I found Veterans for Peace. There's a lot of men and women like me who found that what we were doing wasn't right. And right now, today, I believe God is fulfilling prophecies through us. This is the time that was talked about. Evil is thought of as good, good is thought of as evil. There's wars and rumors of wars. And I would love to find a way to get let's do some true ministry, bring the truth into light with the members of the American government and the other corporate leaders of today. Selfishness has corrupted
Can I add
the
something?
Yeah, absolutely, Father.
So just follow Jack along what you were saying is one of the things Patrick and I were talking before the stream was about other people getting stuck in these kind of dialogue. You got to do this or that, or what's the worst. We did, if Patrick remembers this, the conference we did last year was Seek First the Kingdom of God, and that was about prioritizations. So, Father Turbo had said, saving your nation won't save your soul. But saving your nation is still a virtue. And people kind of misinterpreted that. What Father Turbo was talking about is first things first. And that's why we had John here as the First Things Foundation there. So one of the things that I would say that is at First Things is what we in the clergy, and Patrick's been involved, and is trying to establish at a local communal missionary mindset in which we acquire the Spirit of truth, the Holy Spirit, who filleth all things. And that is not an idea. It's not a Gnostic idea. It's not a political ideology. It's an incarnational reality, and it's a community. It's Trinitarian. And so what we're trying to do is get people to experience that and have that as a template that goes out, because I think this local organic, I don't know how to say evangelical, but Holy Spiritism, Trinitarianism, that's a first things first. It'll ultimately inform the rest of the levels. So, like, what am I supposed to do politically? What's the greatest threat? What are we going to do about, well, that'll save us. And as Nicholas had said too, it's so different in the rural areas, in the community that we have. Like, I'm only speaking for Meyer, but I'm sure all of you have had experiences that if the grid goes down, Montanans aren't going to have a problem. Why? Because we're connected to the land. And I know people in the South, I know Rebecca's going to be doing a conference about Southern Orthodoxy and the notion of the agrarian, but it's a universal. It's not Southern. It's not Montanan, or it's human. It's connected to the ground. in a Eucharistic way that, again, I'm not dependent on the city. If the grid goes down, because as Nikolai had pointed out, and all of you, there's no common ethos in the city.
No.
Cities are mess.
Yep. Yep.
Right? They're completely and they're helplessly dependent upon the system. So if it shuts down, that's it. And so I think that could be a first things first model for growth in the United States is get plugged back. Let's go back to the community, a common ethos.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking about this
experience that and then share it in your community and let it grow.
This exact point is what we were talking about in our latest think tank meeting on the website, was how orthodoxy for young men allow it to be this intellectual thing. But until you put yourself in a parish where they say, hey, we have a festival this weekend, we need you to work XYZ, where now you have responsibilities, accountability, you're not part of a community. And this is one of the things that orthodoxy really offers, is to be plugged into a local community of shared values oriented towards God, towards love, towards self-sacrifice for each other. And
J.Y. Lewis.
Yeah, and Gen Z, I think they don't, like, where is the Gen Z are going to find that? You know, at least secularly, let's move back, you know, America to the 50s. Yeah, you could still find that in secular ways in the country. You know, there's a book that I read called Bowling Alone, which was a sociological overview of bowling in the United States and how this was such a huge American pastime that was done communally, and how bowling alleys are almost going out of business in the United States because people don't do shared activities with groups of people.
That's so weird, because guess what I did last night that I picked
You
back
bowled
up?
alone?
Orthodox bowling night. Weird that you bring out of all the examples.
You know, actually, I wanted to bring up something that you just triggered in my head real quick about that. The Orthodox phenomena, or how we understand orthodoxy, it doesn't become real until it's tangible. This is why one of the things that you always hear Orthodox say is "come and see," right? Because it's about, for Orthodoxy fundamentally is about, from my perspective and from what I've talked with my clergy about, is praxis.
Yes.
Your theology does not become real until it's applied, and you
Right.
do it, and you're actually experiencing it. And in the same way, I think this applies to a lot of things in our life. If you don't have, like, you can say all the theory in the world about, oh, we need to have more children, people need to be pro-natalist, but you're not truly pro-natalist until you have children, right? I mean, that's my perspective. Like, and it's not a bash against people that don't have kids yet. I'm just saying that it doesn't become real until you apply it and you do it, and then it becomes real. In the same way, our theology needs to become real through praxis. And Father Deacon, we've talked online before on Twitter and other places, and this goes the same thing that slightly off tangent, but like it's similar to like people.
I already know it. Go.
The Latinizers who don't apply their theology is not applied in the church. You don't actually apply it. It's just this amorphous thing that they read and theorize about, but it's not something that's actually lived. And I think that's important. So I just wanted to point that out.
Right. Well, that communal aspect is going to help fight against the nihilism and the isolation, right? I mean, spiritually, isolation is the way that the devil pries on people. And Orthodoxy teaches us, Father Deacon, you can speak to this, that we're saved communally. Like, we work out our salvation together. You know, very few people can be St. Mary of Egypt and wander into the desert, you know, and build themselves and find their salvation alone. That's not the way that the church is generally structured.
This is weird that you bring this up. So one of the things Father Moses and I were talking about, and I guess you could call it incel, is Zoomers were basically saying they didn't think that was a problem. I'm like, well, it might be that you've never had a girlfriend. That might actually be a problem. If you're socially retarded, and that's why you can't, there's obviously, in spiritually and mature, then we need to work on that, right? Now, if you get to the point that you decide celibacy, right, and you don't, that's one thing. But like Nicholas said, Nikolai, you know, you don't decide that alone. Now, what was really interesting, this goes to your point, Patrick, there's only 2 prescribed ways in Orthodoxy, married or monastic. Now, of course, there can be made exceptions. If somebody was divorced or their spouse had died or something like that, what the church would recommend. This kid couldn't believe it. He was like, I've never heard that. So,
somebody has a lot of background noise. Where is somebody where there's people talking in the background? Okay.
Even St. Mary was plugged into like a community, right? Through priests and stuff like that. Even in monasteries, the hermits, and those are really rare cases. You'd have to be very spiritually elevated. Can be hermits. They still have a community bringing them food. They still do confessions, like St. Mary did with St. Zosimus, and they were under the most important thing. They're under obedience. St. Mary of Egypt was under obedience to one person, right? And this is why you're either obedient to your spouse, and that looks different ways depending on if you're man or female, what that role is, or you're obedient to an abbot. That's how you're saved, because we are saved together. And when you're baptized, that's why the whole community's there. You're baptized. I love what Father Russell says. There's only one thing you can do alone, and that's go to hell.
Ooh,
That's so true.
He cooked with that. That's good.
Yeah.
I like that.
I was talking with Father Turbo yesterday, and we were talking about a lot of this kind of stuff of building community, and like certain words, like when you say a parallel society, people have this wrong concept where they think you're going to go into the woods and be by yourself. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's not what we mean exactly. But using like the model of how Orthodoxy survived throughout the Ottoman Empire, it was by, because my background's from Cyprus, and that's something I learned from my grandfather and other people of his era. They gathered around monasteries, and they built communities around the monastery. And then the monastery had access to books, education, helping people survive off the grid technically. And then the community around it supported the monastery, and it was like a back and forth understanding. And they had a monarchy. Then the monarchy was obviously the monarch, but Christ. And everyone has the same belief systems. Everyone, you can trust your neighbor because you know that their number one obligation is to Christ. So therefore, they're going to keep that in mind. So building communities like that, where it's not necessarily like running into the woods and creating a communal society. That's not what I'm referring to. But like proper community where we're all connected, having these types of conversations, even online, like this conversation itself might spark someone to kind of start building. I think it's the only way to look forward, right? And like worst comes to worst, you have cool neighbors. Like I could trust you guys to be my neighbors. We're gonna take care of each other, and you can take care of, like, you know what I mean? That kind of thing, I think, is an important aspect. Here in Mexico, where I live, I don't live in a gringo neighborhood. I live right with local Mexicans. My nephew and I are like the only gringos for like miles, and the people here are really well connected with each other. And they're really, really cool people. Like they don't care that we don't speak Spanish. We all take care of each other. You see families still on the streets. If something happens, and it has happened, where like the power goes out here all the time, you see neighbor to neighbor going next, like, hey, you need any water? You need any of this? Like that community spirit, it's pretty important, because also they know that if they don't do that, they're all screwed.
Right. Well, and with your example in Mexico, I'm sure there's still the remnant of Catholicism, Christianity, and the culture. And you look at like the 1960 counterculture with all the communist compounds, you get kind of the example of, you said, moving into the wilderness and creating their utopia community, and all those failed. They led to violence, sexual violence and abuse, rape, this type of thing. And so, we have to be oriented towards something transcendent to really fall into line and share those values with each other. If it's just towards an abstract idea of like utopian collectivism, it's not going to work.
Yeah, it's utopianism versus real localism. So I know, like in Spanish, the concept is fueros. In English, apparently the equivalent is costumal, which is not a word I've ever heard spoken in my life ever. I've only read it, and I've only seen it in like medieval documents. But it's the concept of local life. So and the local life is usually centered around it's centered around a parish. The most important spiritual authority in town is the parish priest, and the most important secular authority is your local jefe or don or mayor or what have you. I know Father Deacon, those one morning prayer where I think you asked the chat, which was like, what's the alternative to nationalism versus globalism? And first thing that popped in my head was fueros, just because that's how the Spanish Empire ran, and the costumos, how merry old England ran. And then you have the Orthodox Imperio of which essentially I would define as like imperial localism of the Byzantine Empire and the Russian Empire. Of course, I'll let the Greeks and the Russians fight it out over which one did it better, because I've seen them in real life debate it.
If I can add something to what Jose said real quick, you'll notice there's only one region in South Korea that has a positive birth rate. Positive, meaning they're actually adding to the population. And that is the most rural area of all of Korea. And it is its only industry is local industry. It's fishing. Like they bring in the fish, they sort through it, and then they ship it to the factories, and it goes to the rest of the country. And the people there are united, and they promote motherhood in such a deep degree. They have, like, I think, monthly mother walks, mother parades, just where all the moms bring out their little like strollers and all their kids. And you'll notice the distinction between that city, because I've been there, between the downtown area of Seoul, is that the mothers are pushing around carriages with kids in them, actually, not little dogs.
Yeah.
And to build on that, just the why, JP Morgan's concern, why is it that under Tsar Nicholas II, with the industrialization of Russia, why is it that their birth rates were not dropping from industrialization the same way it dropped for the English and the Americans? It's because localism, yet again, most industry was owned by, ironically, the workers themselves. So the Bolsheviks, when they overthrew the Russians, the Russian system, etc., and they nationalized all the industries. The irony is the means of production were already in the hands of the workers. Most, like 95% of industry was worker cooperatives, and the remaining 5% were like key strategic industries, which the Tsar directly owned. And because when your heavy industry is all owned by the workers themselves and locally owned, well, that provides incentives that is an incentive for people to reproduce, for men to father more children, etc., because they'll be able to get their kids jobs in their industry, in their field of work. So you had this if you compare the industrialization of Russia prior to the Bolsheviks and the industrialization in the Anglophone world, in Russia you had a continuation from the like medieval, like what are they called, the worker, what were they called in the
guilds?
Not guilds, because guilds in the East. They had a specific West. There's a specific word in the East because it was actually even more locally controlled. It began with an A. I forget the term, but essentially from these medieval groups, you have a straight line from these groups into modern industry, proto-modern industry that was happening under Tsar Nicholas II, and because you had this flat transition that was locally based, for lack of a better term, that's the fundamental reason why birth rates didn't start dropping. They only started dropping post Bolshevik Revolution.
Father Deacon's got to head out. Father Deacon, thank you so much for joining us. God bless you, brother. Tell your wife I said hi, as always.
Thank you. And looking forward to you coming out next year. And by the way, the theme for next year is, you have to tell me if you're more interested in doing the men's retreat or the main conference. But the theme for next year's Montanica is Therapia. So, but yeah, thanks for your prayers. I got to head out to go teach the catechesis and continuing education Orthodox class. So God bless you. What wonderful talks, wonderful ideas that all of y'all shared. And may God preserve us for many years.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Well, God bless, brother. Take care. Just want to catch up on some super chats real quick and then get back into the conversation. Thank you very much to Screwed Up Rebellion. Became a COTEL crew member for 2 months now. He mentioned Cyber Polygon as one of the biggest threats. And he said Christos Anesti for $10. Thank you so much, Screwed Up Rebellion. And then Jason McGinnity throws in $5. for the mention of Shelby Foote. I'm researching that period currently and loved his trilogy. And I have to give a special thank you to Jose, because I have the trilogy right here. Thank you to Jose purchasing it for me as a wedding gift. Thank you so much, Jose. And maybe you can speak to a little bit about Shelby Foote and his
I will.
trilogy over the Civil War. 1 second, we just have two more.
Sure.
And then Tooth Chicken throws in $5. What Ethan and EMP slash said EMP slash solar flare, 9 out of 10, dead within a year. And then Connacht Rider said, bring Wesley back on. I don't know, but I appreciate the support, Connacht Rider. And
how much money for that DP?
Yeah. And then BMX 1966 threw in $10 over on Streamlabs, and an anonymous donator over on the Dono chat threw in $10, no message. So thank you very much to BMX 1966 and the anonymous donator. Go ahead, Jose. You're going to say something about Shelby Foote and the trilogy?
Yeah. So I finished that. I finally finished it on Wednesday, the last of the 3,000 pages, and I definitely would classify it as America's Iliad, because it definitely deals with the issue of identity in the sense of the Civil War was the point that forged Americans into a collective. Or before it was just people were of their various states. It was the United States are, not the United States is. So, after the Civil War, it became the United States is. The North and South saw themselves after the fighting. They genuinely did see themselves as fellow Americans. Like the fact is, Longstreet and Grant, became best buddies. Men like Johnston and Sherman respected each other tremendously after fighting each other, all throughout the, Georgia and Tennessee. You did really have a coming together and forging of a unified American identity post the Civil War. And what Shelby Foote wrote there are many things I could say about his work, but one thing that stands out is he was the one who kicked off the whole writing historical narratives, nonfiction narratives. His big issue with how history was traditionally done academically is it's super dry and it's not written for the masses. And his goal was write it as a story. I mean, it's literally his story. So his whole goal was, he was a novelist and he was a mediocre novelist. He was like, okay, let me just do this. And it turned into an epic, and it is properly an epic. It's it's longer than Lord of the Rings. It's much longer than Lord of the Rings. It's almost as long as Game of Thrones when you put it all together. But his attitude towards the how do you take how do you take a nonfiction history of the Civil War and turn it to a narrative? And one thing he said in an interview, which I resonate with, I think it's actually an orthodox. And as a big O orthodox concept, and I wish Father Deacon was still on because he could confirm or tell me if I'm completely wrong, is that plot is something you want to discover. It's actually something that you discover as you're going through the history. So, you have the characters, you have your, and there is a narrative in history inherently. It's not just things happen. There is an actual plot that's going on. And fundamentally, the plot of all history is the life of Jesus Christ. And the work that he's doing throughout creation. So, and every short history you write, it's a shorter version of that, and it's recursive throughout history. So Shelby was obviously not Orthodox, and he was raised in a mixed household. It was a mixture of Southern Christian, and I know his mother was Jewish, but he never he identified strongly with the South and more or less rejected the Jewish heritage part. But then what makes that's the thing that makes his work is that one, discover the plot. Two, he's a Southerner who definitely is biased towards the South, but he respects Abraham Lincoln, which is also makes it work. He respected the position of the Northern leadership. So that's why you get this narrative really works. And then the other element that I would say that makes it work as well. Oh man, I forgot it.
It's all good. Yeah. Well, somebody brought up a point. So getting back to our panel topic today, regards the threats to the American people. Most of our conversation, even though we've addressed again Zionism, people that have maybe religious dispositions towards the various destructions of parts of the Western civilization, China, Russia, all these different things, big pharma. But it seems like most of our conversation oriented around community and identity and falling into nihilism. But somebody mentioned that they said, and I'm curious what the panel says, and I'll voice my opinion later, that one of the biggest problems with Americans is their lack of information. What do you guys think about the role of information, or how much people are aware of the circumstances? Is that the biggest threat to the American people?
Well, if I can jump in on this one, I've got a group of pretty well educated friends of different opinions. I'm the only Orthodox Christian amongst them, but there's some varied viewpoints there. They would all consider themselves pretty well informed and having access to lots of information, and they'll read from various sources, and they'll try to put a picture together. And when Ukraine kicked off, in the run up to that, I've been paying a lot of attention to the Telegram channel Intel Slava. And
I'm familiar.
Okay, yeah. So I got looped into that because I saw it publishing some news on the ground from when Russia went into
right at the beginning
Kazakhstan
of 2022.
Prior to that, they went into Kazakhstan to stop the color revolution from happening there. We forget about that, but they did a major intervention there to stop that from escalating. And when Ukraine started to escalate, Intel Slava was publishing everything about it. So when it came to that final, talking heads here kept on just, being they're going to go in, they're going to go in. They've been saying that since 2014. So the kind of information you get, and then is one, garbage in, garbage out. And then the worldview you're filtering it through is two. And then you can make a conclusion. Now, I predicted that, but did I predict it? I was paying really close attention, and it was obvious. I think to people who were paying that kind of attention. And then when it came to that conflict, I stood completely opposite of my entire group of buddies. They're all, they're not pro-regime U.S., just NPCs, but they thought that Russia was going to have a really difficult time there. That, they believed a lot of the information that they were getting from, whatever, AP, Reuters, et cetera, and they don't have the same kind of worldview and background. Right. So I think most Americans don't. And one of the problems of that is all these guys are also very successful in life. So when they have their ideas about things, because they've been pretty successful and they're surrounded by a lot of successful people on paper, materially, they tend to think that the picture that they have is a clear one. And I think that that ends up being one of the biggest sources of failure, whether it's you're predicting some kind of global event, not a whole lot of personal life impact there, or if you're doing a lot of things, is that you have this success and then you think that the ideas you have are really solid. Yeah, and up until this, people haven't really had a pretty shattering event to their worldviews. After that, a few of them were like, okay, well, hold on. Where were you getting that? Because clearly this isn't what I was told it was. Maybe more of that reflecting is happening, but I don't think the mass of people are doing that kind of reflecting. So I think yes, people are very informed, but they're informed they have a false view that they're being informed by, and they're putting it through a bad lens. Right.
Well, when you were speaking, first thing my general position towards is the lack of information the biggest threat to Americans. I'd say being in the information age, it's the oversaturation of information. Kind of getting to your point, people don't know where to choose. But if you guys are aware of the recent Daryl Cooper, Tucker Carlson conversation, this actually leads credence to the argument that it is about information, although that's not my actual foundational opinion on the topic. But Daryl Cooper of his podcast Martyr Made, he was commenting on World War II and potentially the villainous actions by Winston Churchill, and just providing maybe facets of facts and information about World War II that people weren't aware. And he talked about how this is basically the myth of the global world order right now, post World War II. And to see the reaction by people both on the right and the left to that conversation, not necessarily points to the lack of information, but certainly the digestion of mythological narratives. What is your guys' thoughts about that, and who saw that interview or wants to comment on it?
I just want to say I fully agree. I think Neil Postman had a really good argument in Amusing Ourselves to Death, that it won't be Orwell's concept of banning the books that will be the issue. It was Huxley's example of people won't even want to read the books and won't even understand what's in the books. So I think discernment's a big issue. And I think in the interview that you're referring to, you really see that. So it's like we're swimming in a sea of mediocrity, both of like culture, art, opinions and thoughts, and people don't know how to discern things, and people don't read books, people don't read between the lines or have the discernment to kind of filter through. So like looking at World War II from the lens of that interview, for a lot of people that are not familiar with that information, to them it was a big shock. And that's why you see the left and the right both commenting with these bizarre, extreme, polarizing opinions, where the reality is the royal path that's in the middle, right? And so I think going back to amusing ourselves to death and swimming in a sea of mediocrity, I think discernment's the big issue here. So even like in that interview, if you have proper discernment, you'll understand what he's trying to tell you.
Right.
So I think that's like a
Well,
big
and
problem.
what you're saying, the Mano, is discernment, at least from our perspective, is going to get back to morality and your spirituality, right? So that was Father Deacon's big point, that his number one was the lack of morality being the biggest threat to the American people. Mm-hmm. And that really gets back to being able to decipher and move through the information age, because we are oversaturated with narratives and myths and information, generally speaking. So,
and I'd go upstream of that and point out success, material success. People who have a lot of material success, why should I go to church? I've got 3 kids. I'd have more, but how can you get a car these days that actually fits more than 3 kids? A good friend of mine literally said that.
Wow.
But that's the worldview, right? He's like, well, that's inconvenient. What else? It's been tough enough, but we'd really like to have some, but all of these logistical factors get in the way. I'm trying to be practical. He's an engineer. So I think a lot of folks get materially successful, and they're not like, bad people like TV, right? They don't steal. They're not doing wrong stuff in the American sense. So what's the point? And then because of that lack of positive morality, not just not doing the bad stuff, but they haven't done that cleansing work. And so then there's the lack of discernment. So I think that success is a big enemy.
I think discernment also in who you're gaining your information from. And I think this goes back to what we said earlier about, I have to look at somebody's life and assess if that's somebody that's worth following. So for example, my clergy is the clergy that I listen to, and also my own clergy, are successful family people. They're successful in that area, and so I can trust their discernment on how they're filtering information. So that helps me filter the information. I also think if we're going to look at like popular voices to help us get information, let's look at the results of their lives. I'll say this. I'm actually a pretty big Tucker Carlson fan, because I think that he's a genuine person. But one thing that helps me trust him in a sense, not entirely, is the fact that he's a successful father with many children, and he's happily married. That's huge in helping me be able to trust that this person is someone who I know has good discernment. So I think that's an important aspect of it too.
Yeah.
Curious, have you ever connected the dots for somebody on that point who, is of the mindset of, oh, well, I read various sources, I look at information, I have these articles, and they don't do that work that you're talking about of looking at the source, like who's this author? And they're like, well, who cares who the author is? Don't judge the art by the artist, sort of a deal. Have you ever swayed somebody on that one?
I've talked to some people, and I think I've convinced them, but basically all I tell them is that, listen, the fruit of one's lives tells me if the information they're taking and applying to themselves is actually useful and efficacious for them. People that it's Jim Bob actually made my Jim Bob. Jim Bob talks about this. He's like, what is the point of trutherism if it doesn't lead to bearing fruit and being fruitful? If because he used to debate with this guy, I think his name was Ryan Remembers, and the guy's obsessed with numbers. He's like, we're finding numbers everywhere, but then it's like, but bro, why aren't you having children? You know what I mean? Like that is such a, I think, such a cogent point that I think you just got to hammer it home. Honestly, you just got to point out and say, look at the people who have been consistent in their worldview, consistent in their ideology and how it applies, and look at the fruits of their life, and then see if they've been right more often than not. That's really what you got to do.
So I want to bring Tapio. Feel free to address the topic today. But my last big question that I wanted to pose to the panel, and maybe I'll wait till after Tapio, but it has to do with who is the biggest threat to the American people domestically. And let's not avoid, or let's not focus on because we already talked so much about identity, community, morality, but maybe more something concrete in which people could point towards threats domestically. But Tapio, feel free. You don't have to address that question, but just the general topic today.
Sure. No, I will address that question.
Okay.
I think it's pretty much the same answer for domestically and internationally for me. And I don't want to. I want to be very careful with the terms I use here. But have any of you ever heard of the term Sayanim? SayAnim. So I learned about this word in the book, in the autobiography of an ex-Mossad agent. And what a Sayanim is, they have this, the Mossad has this helper function. They have a unique intelligence agency, different than any other intelligence agency, where they can call upon anybody around the world who is 100% of their tribe. And the intelligence agency will call upon them. They cannot pay them. They can help them in other ways. But essentially, they convince them, you will be saving your people all around the world. You will be helping your homeland. You will be promoting peace and our political dominance in the world. And so it's very easy for these people through this program to be sucked into this and to be convinced that they're special and they're part of, you know, this secret spy program and all this stuff. We do not, it's interesting, even us who are so keyed into these things are not aware of this apparatus that is among us and operating at a high level with the Mossad and Unit 8200 and these other groups. Not only that, but I think this ties into the larger apparatus that has been operating for quite some time, using these technological partnerships to steal our technology and give it to our political enemies to sell it to them. There's all sorts of jets and missiles and all of these very expensive technologies that we have developed within the U.S. are being stolen by these people, by these Sayanim, funneled through that country, and then resold to the people who we are political enemies with, wartime enemies with. They are literally betraying us on the most fundamental level. But for some reason, our system cannot comprehend this. It cannot see this, and it cannot flush these people out. Maybe because they have such control at this point over the domestic government. But I'm not sure. I would love to hear what you guys have to say about this.
Well, and I appreciate you wording it the way that you did. So thank you. I think we all pick up on what you're getting at. And we mentioned earlier the problem of Zionism and various theologies that may view some of the actions being taken as building towards the prophetic workings and the bringing of their Messiah. So I agree with that. And I want to let the rest of the panel speak to the domestic threat and what they perceive. But certainly one of the things you're getting at is in-group preference and a community that still has a collective identity, a shared identity, which is getting to the first half of this panel discussion in regards to what America has lost. So we don't have a shared collective ethos and collective identity. But Anybody else want to discuss their thoughts on maybe the biggest domestic threat to the American people?
Yeah, I I have one that's real quick. Then I have to hop off.
Sure.
I think the greatest domestic threat is actually rooted in our how would you call it, unwilling collaborators when it comes to certain ideological functions. So, for example, I know most people who are Democrats or whatever who tangentially support the dissolution of the family unit and culture, and I think that is actually one of the most dangerous domestic threats, is these people that just kind of go along with it. They just kind of, they're sailing along in this with the thing because of this desire not to offend, this desire not to step on toes because they're too comfortable. So I guess what I would say is that the greatest thing is comfort. That's the most dangerous thing that we're dealing with, is comfort. It's the fact that so many conservatives and liberal people are just comfortable allowing things to just go as they are. And they always think, oh, we can just worry about the next election cycle. There'll always be a time that we can get things turned around. Oh, it's not. There's no urgency in them. There's no urgency in building community. There's no urgency in forming families. There's no urgency in any of that. It's just this kind of mindless consumerism. And so I think the biggest threat is complacency amongst the masses.
Yeah.
So I'll say that. And I gotta get going, but God bless you guys.
Yeah, great point, and God bless you and the family, man. Thanks for hopping on and contributing.
Yeah.
And next time we have an open panel, do feel free to join again.
Absolutely. Oh, one other thing. If any of you guys need help with anything, reach out to me. I do IT work now, independently. So, God bless.
God bless, brother.
God bless you.
Wonderful. Hey, some great conversations. I love what he said. The false sense of comfort creates the apathy, and I think that has been the problem. And frankly, I don't think I believe we have the option that we could avoid waiting until November for another political season to be shown on the TV and stuff. What I see the real problem, the beasts of rule that have risen, the structures of corporation and government, and its selfishness, the enabling of selfishness has created the billionaires who are rising, and the corporations have taken control of the state, and the people have been working hard to pay the bills. But I think the world is ready for
Well, the selfishness that you point out to also leads to the moral decay, right? So when we look at sexual promiscuity, all these things that are going on, abortion, this type of stuff, this also leads to a sense of self-worship that is certainly rampant amongst the American populace. And we mentioned before that the fastest growing religious group in the United States are nuns, N-O-N-Es, meaning none of the above on a religious survey. So it's atheists, agnostics, and people who are spiritual but not religious. It's now like 30, at least the last survey, which was like 2020 or 2019, it was like 35%, almost 40% in the United States.
It's a spiritual battle that's happening, but I believe there is a spiritual revival that is happening that's underneath or aside from the atrocities that are rising too.
This spiritual revival, is it Christian? I mean, what do you mean by spiritual revival?
There's a questioning. I'm seeing more and more conversations, and I don't think it may just be my experience because that's where I turned my life, but I'm seeing and hearing, because of the communication available today, there's people around the world talking about different experiences and different ideas. This information age we're experiencing, the bad side, the downside is it's real easy for us to get caught in echo chambers.
Sure.
But there's the truth. And the truth.
William, you're wanting to say something, brother?
Well, I was going to agree and just kind of voice that, like, if you're coming from even an atheist perspective, if you think about things too much and you're a little autistic, or if, you're just kind of like meh about the whole spirituality thing because you're raised in a liberal environment or something, and you don't go to church growing up and all that, moving from that to a spiritual awareness is a lateral move, and it's probably a little bit more dangerous. You go either way there, and I think that's where you were pointing out, like, well, what kind of spirituality are we talking about?
Right. Wicca is like the fastest growing faith in England right now.
Yeah. But, first people have to be open to the idea of God, and the notion that Christianity is like a good operating system for humanity. That's maybe something that a lot of more like, I don't know, modern techno brains could kind of get on board with. But, what was being said a moment ago was reminding me of what Jose was talking about, which was, and Jack, I think you were talking about kind of all this centralization of whatever, corporation, media, all this stuff. And that seems to be an antithesis to what Jose was saying made some of these empires successful, was their distributed systems. And I don't know, we have a lot of fragility here. So, it just kind of reminded me, it seemed like kind of like a negative image of that portrait that Jose was painting earlier of a model that's successful. And we seem to be approaching the opposite of increasing centralization and everybody consuming, if not the same media, the same kind of brand.
Right.
The
homogenization of the individual, both interiorly and exteriorly.
Yeah.
Jose, were you wanting to say something, brother?
Yeah, the way to think about it is fractalness. Successful systems are fractal. That's why the Byzantine Empire was able to survive the Fourth Crusade, because once Constantinople was taken over, and you have the Franks establishing the Latin Empire,
right?
You had three, in Trebizond and Nicomedia. The other one I forget where it was, but at the moment, but you had three, continuations of the Byzantine state that immediately picked up the pieces from where things were cut off with the conquest of Constantinople. So that's an example of a fractal system that was able to survive. Fractal systems are much more anti-fragile, and that's why the United States doesn't. I don't see the American empire as it exists or has existed since the end of the Civil War. I don't see it continuing past the 2030s because it is not a fractal system. I mean, it apes fractality in the sense of like it apes decentralization with, state governments and the federal government. It's essentially trying to mimic what Russia was under the czars and / is becoming yet again. But in reality, the power is highly, highly centralized among essentially a bunch of families that are all intermarried and interrelated with each other, and it's not good for long-term survivability of a state system.
Mm-hmm.
The thing, if we look at a lot of the issues that are surrounding the United States currently, and you look at it back like to a global, like you zoom out and you look at it globally, you see a lot of these commonalities. So it's a global threat. It seems it's not just in the U.S. And I think you can kind of say that arguably, like, well, it's always kind of been like that. And one of the reasons why the U.S. kind of remained somewhat free and had, well, not, compared to other countries in the world, and why it is a big threat to these global elites, quote unquote, let's call them, is because there was a form of sort of unity and identity. Like you guys kind of, like I'm calling you guys because I'm not American, you'd group together behind some sort of value system, some sort of belief system. Because the reality is you're not going to get everyone to think Christian, and you're definitely not going to get everyone to think Orthodox. So if you're looking for a solution that's practical within the next couple of years, you have to go back to what made quote unquote America great, right, back in the day. And a lot of that had to do with you guys were You guys were able to have like manufacturing within your own country. You were able to support yourselves. You didn't need anybody else. You didn't need to be a global citizen, quote unquote. You had your own sort of thing. So I think the only way that you can kind of do that in the short term that you have to kind of come up with a solution is because there's so much chaos around everybody in every state, wherever you are, finding unity in the fact that you can all agree that things are going downhill and find some sort of values that you can all attach yourselves to. Hopefully they're Christian values. And if you want to present them as Christian values, like show that many of those Christian values are the things that make societies great. Those are the things that make certain countries, expand and other ones shrink, right? Those kinds of things. Because, that the reality is it's a global problem. And it goes back to the certain group of individuals that we kind of avoid referencing. They have their hands in everybody's politics. They have their hands in everybody's pockets. It's not just an American problem, it's a global problem, but Americans can have an American solution because of the system that you've once had.
Right.
Hey, can I jump in here? Because that is... I believe God's plan is for America to start leading the world to solutions. And earlier, someone mentioned what is really the greatest threat to America. It's the poor leadership. It's the inadequate and the incompetent leadership that's been in the administration of the United States government. And according to my understanding of this nation's rules, if this is equality, well, let's get some conscious people together, maybe followers of Christ who can help these employees of the American taxpayers and the lobbyists. But we can encourage them and remind them what integrity is, honor is. Let's see if we can get some of the members in Congress willing to die in order for wars to end. I mean, many of the soldiers are.
Never going to happen.
Well, and before we wrap up here, because I'll get your guys' closing comments before we end the stream. Certainly, many people are incompetent, but to some degree, they're very competent in what they're trying to do here, and so. This is why I always got so frustrated with people who just like, oh, can you believe Joe Biden did? Joe Biden's not doing anything. Like that's the scapegoat that they want you to place all this off. This is a highly orchestrated, over 100-year plan, and it's been very, very effective. And if there's any sort of shining light in the conversation, is that most of it is in individuals' control. So living a moral life, aligning themselves with God, taking on responsibility, finding community, that many of the things we mentioned. Now, when it comes to certain groups of people that have, high influence in American politics, American society, American media, banking systems, that's out of our control. But if we were a more moral country, maybe we would have dealt with that problem years ago.
Yes.
But does anybody have anything to say on the topic before we kind of wrap things up? Go ahead.
Oh, I like what you said. Control the controllables. What do we do as individuals? We build community, prepare for what's coming, and if we're not doing things physically with our hands or actions, talking is an action as well. And if you're making yourself aware, reading, becoming learned of history, I'm inspired to check out that book that Jose mentioned. That'd be mine, is control what you can control, and continue the conversation and open up awareness to people if you can. But at the same time, have those relationships. Don't break a relationship because somebody won't wake up. It's
right. No, that's a really good point, because I've seen this, especially in the more conspiratorial ends of the orthosphere, is like excommunicating people from their lives, and really what's most effective is not changing your values, but also not breaking relationships with people who are diametrically opposed, because that isolation, as we've already talked about, is the fractal pattern of evil. Right? They want to isolate us, which is a destruction to the fractal pattern of community, which Jose was talking about in regards to the Byzantine Empire.
Yeah, exactly. want to say hi to Jose. I'll see you over in SG, like the book set.
All right. It's good to see you, William.
Yeah, likewise.
Hey, I love it. I was going to step out and wanted to sincerely thank you. What wonderful conversations. And with this, united when we can accept and we can unite and we can influence and not give up on each other, and not enable each other either. If we can unite, we can change this world. And a change of values is just what this world is waiting for. And it's waiting for us to unite, because fear divides us, fear controls, and fear spreads confusion. But when we unite, I'm telling you, the end of wars and immediate reforms, the end of secrets and lies, it's ready. It's waiting for us. Hey,
Amen.
Thank you and blessings to you all.
Yep. God bless, Jack. So wrapping up here, does anybody have any final comments, or let me just address any super chats that came in? New Jerusalem sent in a super sticker for $3. Thank you very much, New Jerusalem. And shout out to David Atlas, been a COTEL crew member for 5 months, said great panel and stream. God bless you all and everyone in chat. Anyways, final comments or conclusions, anything you guys want to leave with the people before we end the stream?
I'd say the biggest domestic threat that hasn't been addressed is, I mean, it relates to the people themselves. It's similar to what Nicholas talked about, but a little different, but different too. For example, so like if Israel kicks off the war with Iran and the U.S. gets dragged in, I actually would not be worried about a draft, because the fact is I live in rural Texas, and so quite a lot of people are going to volunteer to go fight and die for Israel. So that's what I mean by like, given whatever the state does, whatever the powers that be, or the powerful families that rule do, there are a lot of people who are going to fall for a certain lie. When the U.S. goes to war with China, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to foolishly sign up to go fight the commies over there. And it's like, well, what about, why not fight the enemy that's in D.C.?
Right.
That's what I mean by like, and even like in terms of like the financial system. So people talk about inflation. So all money in the United States monetary system, all money is loaned into existence. If people stop taking out debt, you would have rapid deflation. So like literally, whenever you take out debt, you're actually contributing to inflation. So that's for example, so that's the thing by like the way the beast system works is they always, what do you call it? They offer temptation, and then people take it, and then there's a consequence. It's not just, these people are just doing things are just happening one-sidedly, and we all collectively have no fault to bear. The fact is, if people didn't take all that easy mortgage money, housing prices would be way, way cheaper. There's so much of the American system. It's what's it called? Faustian. It's a Faustian bargains all over the place. And so that is fundamentally how to fight against the system in terms of realizing, oh wait, if these people are offering to loan me money for this thing, that's probably not a good idea. If the system wants me to behave in a certain way or think a certain way, and that's the thing to think about too when it comes to thought. Like when on the issue of is a lack of information. Fundamentally, it's a problem of worldview. Which relates to the news, how clouded our newses are as a collective, as people,
right,
or peoples plural of that live in the empire,
right.
And the thing is, even with all the information that's out there, like most of it is noise. More data is not necessarily a good thing. You spend an evening and you read some St. John Damascene and you read some Aristotle and you read Fathers and Sons by Turgenev. You've instead of watching or reading or processing news, you'll get a lot more useful information and nourishment for the mind, the soul, and the nous than you would with the alternative of just consuming media to be up to date on what's going on.
Right.
And one thing I know I've seen in my own life is, and other people I know as well, the more you detach, if you can detach, the more you detach from the daily, the 2-week, news cycle. And the more you focus on the stuff that has endured and lasted through time, the thing that's the most enduring, of course, is the faith. Lives of the saints and the fathers, but also works of art, etc., that have endured through time. there's a reason why these things endure. And focusing on that, it'll give you perspective in regards to the now, what's happening now. If you understand the past, you'll understand a lot of what's going on right now.
Right. Jason throws another $5, says, couldn't agree more about Foot. Thanks for the comments, Jose. Wonder if you guys could comment on pre-Civil War Puritans.
My dad was a Puritanophile. Do you want me to? I read a lot on Puritans as a kid. I mean, okay, I'll give a little bit. So the thing is, the Puritans were not. So they were kind of crazy, but what they were trying to do initially, like the first 3 generations of Puritans in New England, they were trying to recreate merry old England. They were actually the last state entity that opposed the legalization of usury in the West. Outside of the only other lands were the Orthodox lands where usury was banned. So they were really trying to build, what merry old England was in the 13th, 14th, and 12th century. So I do respect him for that. They were actually trying to go back culturally to a more traditional form of Anglo-Saxon life. It's just their religion, the religious beliefs were not, what's the word I'm looking for, supportive of such a culture shift. Mm-hmm. And so what you have by the 3rd generation, that's where you start getting what we call the Universalists and the Unitarians come out of this. Mm-hmm. By that point, my dad actually pinned it on, and I agree with him on this. When they weakened the barrier to communion. When the Puritans, the Puritans in Yankeedom weakened the barrier to communion in I think it was the early 18th century when they did so. That's where things started, for lack of a better term, liberalism really started happening among them. And that's where you start getting the Unitarian streaks and the Universalist streaks, and what we call, or the perfidious Yankee, as some of the Dixie folk I know refer to. That's when that was born. That actually didn't exist in the 17th century Puritan New England. So I see them as a tragedy, because they were trying to go back to something traditional, and they knew that King Henry VIII's Anglicanism was not it, and not a way forward to it. And they were aware of what the English were losing as modernism or progress kept going forward. The problem is they didn't have a faith which gave them the grounding to hold on to something that was unchanging.
Right. They had the right intentions, the wrong methodology.
Yep.
That seems to be the most common thread I've heard tonight, is that having the proper structure of ethics, morality for us, obviously, it's the church, is the easiest way to move forward without dismantling things. I just wanted to throw that in there, because that was a great, Jose, I liked what you just said there. That's interesting. Yeah. I didn't know that about Puritans.
That's great insight, Jose. Mano, Tapio, William, do you guys have any final comments before we close shop here?
I'll just say one small little...
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, you go first.
I'll just say one really small thing. I really appreciate this conversation, so thanks, guys, for everyone's insight. It was great. This is awesome. It's good to see conversations like this online. I just want to say my background's Cypriot, and I know that we've had a lot of problems as an island and as a culture. We've experienced a lot of this stuff for like thousands of years. Like we're always going through this, and I know from the older Cypriots I've spoken to, they constantly would repeat over and over again, things pass, but if you can't keep your family, and what they mean by family is not just your immediate family, like the community around you, if you can't keep that together, you'll always fall, whether it's the Turks, whether it's the British, or whatever. And I just wanted to throw that out there, because I know I could see it now, what my grandfather was trying to teach me 20 years ago. Now that everything's happening, I'm like, that's what he's trying to tell me.
Yeah. Wisdom.
Yeah. Well, in conclusion, I think that the biggest threat are people within the society who have sort of extra societal goals and ambitions. Mm-hmm. How do we deal with this thing? How do we deal with people degenerating society for their own comfort, to go for predatory loans, to get the candy, that's going to rot their teeth out? Pornography, all of these things.
Human trafficking.
How do we end all these things that we all know, You know, all of these people, all of these anonymous detectives are compiling all of this information together and finding out that there's all of these systems that have been covered up for decades and decades, possibly centuries. And so we're finding out about these things and about these guilds of crime. I think the option is a political, well, first of all, a spiritual one, but I think we also need to combine this with a political party. We need to have a strong political party of Orthodox people in America that can all get together and work out what we want, what are our goals. We can talk to Russia when war happens. We can negotiate. We can make peace. We can do all of these things that none of the other parties are going to be doing or even thinking about. Right. So I think we need a strong Orthodox political party in America that we can all get behind and fight behind. And eventually this may even culminate into some sort of monarchy. Those are my thoughts.
William, do you have any closing comments?
No, I appreciate the panel. Thanks a lot for hosting and inviting everybody on.
Of course. And thank you, everybody, for joining. And thank you, Orthodox Boomer Grandmother, who just sent in $20. Thank you so much. He says, great stream. Come visit our Blessed Seraphim Rose Orthodox Strugglers Refuge and get your icons at unionofallicons.com and San Jose Candle Factory here in Central California. God bless you, Alexandria, and the family. God bless your business, and hope everything's going well over on the West Coast. Thank you so much for the support. And let me just double check. Again, major thank you to Jason, David Atlas, New Jerusalem, Connacht Rider, Tooth Chickens, Screwed Up Rebellion, Foregone, and Ethan, BMX 1966, as well as the anonymous donator over on Dono Chat. And I think that's going to do it for tonight, guys. Again, thank you guys for joining. Tapio, feel free to join again in the future, brother. God bless you.
Thank you, David. Thank you.
And Mano, the study of stuff. Thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate it. And William, God bless you as well, brother.
God bless.
Jose, it's always a pleasure, man. We would an open panel wouldn't be an open panel without your insight. I think everybody in the chat loves your historical analysis and your historical reflections because you have an incredibly erudite mind and insight that a lot of people don't have.
Thank you.
So, all right, guys, I will be back potentially Sunday. We have another sponsored stream. We'll be doing an overview of the Serbian Orthodox Church. We'll be covering the history, saints, and important martyrs of the Serbian faith. And I have a stream set up on Tuesday with Rachel Wilson. We'll be talking about techno-feminism and how technology aided and abetted the rise of feminism and looking at androgyny and such in the 21st century. So those are a couple streams that are on the way. So keep your guys' eyes peeled, and I'll see you in the next one. As always, until next time, God bless.
Thank you.